Aloha mai kako. You are watching Hawaii Political Reporter.
And we'll begin with the situation in the Ukraine. The latest I have from the Washington Post, Ukraine opposition sets 24-hour deadline as the protests rage. Ukrainian opposition leaders issued a stark ultimatum to President Yanukovych on Wednesday to call early elections within 24 hours or face more popular rage, after at least 2 protesters killed in confrontations with police in a grim escalation of a 2-month-long political crisis. The protesters' deaths, the first since the largely peaceful protests began last November, fueled fears that the daily demonstrations aimed at bringing down the government over its decision to shun the European Union for closer ties to Moscow over human rights violations could turn more violent. James, there's almost a similar situation playing out in Thailand, on another part of the world. But your take on the very breaking situation in the Ukraine?
Well, there's a lot to say about this, but for people who don't know what this is really all about at the end of the day, I think we can summarize it by saying that once again, the Ukrainian people are being used as the ping pong in this game that's taking place between forces both within and without the country that are trying to basically use Ukraine to forward their own geopolitical agendas. So for people who want the real story, I mean, more or less, this started with the Ukrainian government overspending with money it didn't have. Surprise, surprise, where have we heard that before? Getting into that economic hole when they tried to restructure their loans in order to avoid default. No one was going to help them out with that, so they turned to the EU for some help. The EU offered them an agreement that was all sunshine and rainbows, except for the fact that it was just atrocious in terms of some of the conditions and strings that were attached to it. And when Yanukovych looked and basically out of desperation was about to sign it, Russia said, well, if you sign that, we're going to raise tariffs on you, because Russia knows that this is really part of an EU-NATO agenda against them through the Ukraine. So then rock in a hard place. What do? If you sign on the dotted line, you're going to lose 400,000 jobs right away because of the Russian tariffs. He ends up not going through with it. People erupt into protests because supposedly there's this idealization of Europe going on, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the original impetus of this was, though, I think quite clearly this has moved far beyond that point right now. This isn't about the EU anymore. And in fact, this is becoming bifurcated, and there is a wedge being driven even among the Ukrainian people themselves. People in central and western Ukraine that's where the most of the support for this rebellion is coming from. The southern and eastern parts of the country are horrified at this, and even more so now that this is turning into violence and bloodshed and death. So it is becoming a situation that's out of control. And I think to understand where the rebellion is coming from, I mean, obviously there are people involved in this who really, truly are upset with Yanukovych and his government, and perhaps deservedly so. But I think we have to place this in the context of the Orange Revolution back in 2004, funded by all of the very same groups and people that have been behind the Egyptian Revolution and some of these other destabilization campaigns, Otpor and the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID and George Soros's Open Society Institute, and all of these main players, literally the exact same team that brought you the Egypt Revolution, etc., were there in 2004, and I think we have to understand they were fighting against Yanukovych then, and now people are fighting against Yanukovych again. It is, again, Ukraine is being used as the ping pong in this match between Europe, NATO, Washington, the Western powers versus Russia. And I don't think either side of that is blameless or spotless or perfect or beautiful. And unfortunately, again, the Ukrainian people are being squeezed in the mix there. And I know I've already said a lot, but I just want to turn people's attention to an excellent article up on CNET about a disturbing whole other part of this story. Ukraine texts citizens, hey, we see you're in a mass disturbance, talking about some very Orwellian technology whereby the Ukrainian government is basically identifying individuals by their cell phones and where they are, and then determining they're part of the protest and sending them text messages to say, we know you're part of this protest. Very, very creepy stuff going on, and that's an excellently written article as well. Very, very interesting article. So I'll put that in the show notes so people can go to it. But once again, both sides have an agenda, and they're basically using the Ukrainian people as the ping pong ball.
So it's another situation where it's proxy wars. The proxies are different, but the string pullers are essentially the same. We'll include those links as well, some live stream video links to see in real time what's going on. James, the situation in Thailand, state of emergency begins as Thailand copes with protests. You can get more of that via therepublic.com as protesters vying to overthrow Thailand's government stayed on the streets this past Wednesday despite the start of a state of emergency that comes with curfews, a ban of public gatherings, and the ability to censor local news for the next 60 days. The hat trick completion of our geopolitical rundown here in just this first segment of New World Next Week. Geneva 2, they're calling it. Day one of the Syrian peace talks, so-called, end on fragile ground, and that comes from the Columbia Broadcasting System. All of those links, again, are essentially developing, and it's up to you to go keep yourself up to date and keep yourself informed. James, having said that, we'll move to our second story this week via RT and posted to my own cyberspacewar.com for a little bit of positive news. U.S. judge rules IP address does not prove online piracy. A U.S. federal judge in Washington wrote that a suspected internet pirate should not be prosecuted solely because his computer's IP address was identified by a film studio. The landmark opinion may tip the fortunes of defendants in similar situations. The Hollywood execs behind the movie Elfman filed a lawsuit against hundreds of people alleging that they were guilty of copyright infringement because their internet protocol, IP address, was found to have illegally downloaded the film. An IP address can be likened to a computer's online fingerprint. Each is somewhat unique to the machine it originates from, or at least that's the idea. Copyright holders seeking to take offenders to court often put fake movie files online, record the hundreds or thousands of IP addresses that download it, and then provide that information to the courts in an attempt to identify and sue hapless users on the other side of the screen. The studio argued, James, quote, the defendants either A, downloaded the pirated film themselves, or B, permitted, facilitated, or promoted the use of their internet connections by others to download the film, end quote, according to someone who does have some skin in the game. That would be torrentfreak.com. This is Washington District Judge Robert Lasnik, and he said this week that the rationale, the Hollywood execs' rationale, is insufficient, in part because it begins, James, with the assumption of guilt. Ruling on a motion to dismiss the claim, Lasnik sided with the defendants because the conditions described in complaint section B were overly vague. And we get to the crux and wrap this up. Quote, the movie studio has actually alleged no more than the named defendants purchased internet access and failed to ensure that others did not use that access to download copyrighted material, the judge wrote. Lasnik also said that there was no proof that the person who could wind up facing a lawsuit was in fact the person who chose to download the copy of the fantastic piece of art known as Elfman. James.
Well, welcome to Internet 101, U.S. court system. I'm glad you finally realized that assigning individuals to an IP address is ridiculous because, again, I mean, even if we were to assume that people download things via their own IP address, and if people are out there to do illegal things, they would obviously spoof the IP address through proxies, which can be done exceptionally easily online. So I think IP addresses in these investigations mean almost nothing. But even if we were to assume that they are associated with a certain person who owns a certain account, then you're holding that person personally responsible for anything downloaded through their IP address, no matter what mitigating circumstances, no matter who actually downloaded it, no matter what person was breaking into it and hacking into their Wi-Fi or whatever it is. I mean, it's a ridiculous standard to hold people to, and it falls apart under even the briefest scrutiny to anyone who knows anything about the internet. So this is, I mean, just common sense, but I'll go 18,000 steps further and say that in this day and age, we can't take any conviction based on anything supposedly found on anyone's hard drive for any sort of proof of anything, because even the New York Times now admits that the NSA can hack into and change the files on your hard drive, even if your computer is not connected to the internet. So there is no way to really protect your electronic device other than sitting there in a Faraday cage, which I'm pretty sure most people are not going to build around them. There's no way to protect your devices from that, and anything found on your hard drive could, at least potentially, even according to the New York Times, have been planted there by the NSA. So welcome to Orwell's nightmare vision, and unfortunately, it just means that absolutely no convictions based on what is supposedly found on someone's hard drive could really stand up to real scrutiny in the court system.
Man, and just even today at work, there was an IP address issue where one of the IT guys came running up to my desk asking where somebody was. It happens all the time. IP addresses can be, even just in your regular day-to-day life, can be fudged or messed up. That's not even including what you just talked about, all of the other spook traffic going on. James, for our third and final story this week, in lieu of perhaps our sometimes usual food or health-related story, we'll continue with the tech updates with something I find really fascinating, James, Google Glass. Story folks may have caught over the last couple of days, again, posted to cyberspacewar.com, coming via Ars Technica. Homeland Security agents hold up Google Glass moviegoer. A patron of an AMC movie theater in Columbus, Ohio, was detained this past Saturday for wearing Google Glass while watching a movie, according to a report from The Gadgeteer. The glass wearer, who wishes, at least for now, to remain anonymous, was pulled out of the theater mid-Jack Ryan shadow recruit, which is hilarious, and questioned for an hour by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement special agents. The man recently had prescription lenses fitted to his Google Glass and wore them in to be able to see the movie. According to his testimony published at The Gadgeteer, an agent approached him about an hour into the movie, yanked the glasses off of his face, and commanded the man to follow him outside the theater. 5 to 10 cops and mall security personnel were all, of course, waiting for him. James, I guess I find Google Glass really fascinating because I don't recall a time where the average person out there, out in the world, is beta testing products. I can't really remember a time where, other than now Google Glass, where there are people out there in the world already being pulled over, already getting into court cases. There was just the case recently where the judge ruled in favor of the Google Glass wear, some kind of traffic infraction. We can include that story. James, what's your take on Google Glass?
Well, I think we have to pole vault over these types of stories that are coming along right now, because I think this is prelude to what the bigger agenda is. And I think the bigger agenda is obviously, I mean, it's in Google's interests and the government's interests and all the interests of the big players to have this as the kind of universal type of technology, whether it's Google Glass specifically or whatever brand of whatever company. This is the way that this is all heading, because they obviously want to eventually work us towards the implantation of the brain chip. I mean, that's where this is all going. So they don't want to single people out and to have people, arrested for this. I mean, that's obviously bad PR. Where this is heading, of course, is to say, well, you could be recording anything you're watching at any time, including copyrighted material. So we need to monitor everything that you're watching at all times to make sure that you aren't recording anything illegally. We have to be monitoring all of your activity because, you could be doing something illegal. And that's, I think, where this is ultimately going to head. When you buy the Google Glass or whatever, you're going to sign the waiver saying, well, of course, you can look at all my data to make sure that I'm not doing anything illegal, because otherwise you might have to arrest me at the movie theater or whatever. And so I think that's where this is all going. And again, it's if we sign on to it, if we literally buy the technology, we are literally buying into the control grid. So you've got to put your foot down somewhere. And for me, I think Google Glass might be that line in the sand.
And, of course, James, it doesn't stop there. A little related will include from the BBC, Google unveils smart contact lens to measure the glucose level in your tears.
Nobody is listening to your telephone calls.
I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president.
He's a traitor. There's no American who's going to be snooped on in any way.
For somebody to tell the American people the truth is a heroic effort.
You can't have 100% privacy, and I think that's good.
So essentially there is no Fourth Amendment anymore.
I'm embarrassed. I am not embarrassed.
Over time, that awareness of wrongdoing sort of builds up until eventually you realize that these things need to be determined by the public, not by somebody who's simply hired by the government.
And
I have more to say, but I'm saying too much already.
Even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded.
so I want to be very clear.
When you have a dictatorship or an authoritarian government, truth becomes treasonous.
I think he's a traitor.
An American hero.
This guy is a traitor.
He should be heralded as a hero.
There is still a thing called execution.
If they want to get you, they'll get you in time. And that's a fear I'll live under for the rest of my life, however long that happens to be.
As the public finally becomes outraged over the NSA's illegal spying, members of government and the corporate media wage an information war to misdirect that anger to issues of less importance. To counteract this, a bold new citizen-led initiative to nullify the NSA is now gaining momentum around the United States. This is the GRTV Backgrounder on Global Research TV. One of the less remembered parts of the Osama bin Laden fairy tale was that the NSA had a hard time keeping track of his communications with his al-Qaeda operatives. Why? Because, as General Michael Hayden told CBS News back in early 2001, bin Laden used standard encryption and off-the-shelf American telecommunication products.
In the wake of the attacks, Osama bin Laden has emerged as the prime suspect. Bin Laden has long been one of NSA's main targets, but Hayden says he's a hard man to keep track of because he has access to the latest and best communications equipment made right here in the U.S. and available to anyone who can afford it.
Can't comment specifically on who's doing what, but I can say that people who would do harm to us are using encrypted products and services.
But I think people have a hard time understanding why, if during the Cold War you could stay either even or a step ahead of the big bad Soviet Union with all of its might, why you can't stay a step ahead of Osama bin Laden.
Several reasons. One is the Soviet Union, for its telecommunications, had to rely on those things the Soviet Union built. Osama bin Laden has at his disposal the wealth of a $3 trillion a year telecommunications industry that he can rely on.
He has better technology?
That's one. He has better technology available to him. I can't get into operational details about what it is we know or don't know about him.
Requires more on your part, and you're behind the curve.
We're behind the curve in keeping up with the global telecommunications revolution. Yes, we are. And that's the challenge we have.
Sound unbelievable? That's because it is. As they go on to admit in that very same report, they were tracking bin Laden's satellite phone after all, and as James Bamford and others have described it in exhaustive detail, the NSA was monitoring al-Qaeda's communications hub in Yemen for years prior to 9/11, and purposefully withholding most of that information from the CIA bin Laden unit. But the idea that the NSA just wasn't able to track bin Laden because of his dastardly technology was a key meme for the NSA to implant in the immediate wake of 9/11. That's why the Hayden interview was replayed on CBS less than 48 hours after the attacks, and that's why, as recently declassified documents show, the NSA used 9/11 as an official talking point to justify their illegal surveillance of Americans. This meme, of course, was a lie. As NSA insiders have pointed out for years, most, if not all, of the current illegal collections programs began before 9/11, but the false flag events of September 11th provided the perfect justification for the revelation and expansion of those programs.
I would hear the following phrase, which I think one person in particular probably had regrets ever saying more publicly, that 9/11 was a gift to NSA. A gift.
Now, over a decade later, that meme is paying off. Just 2 weeks after a federal district court judge ruled the NSA's collection of telephone metadata unconstitutional, a different district court judge ruled it constitutional. In his particularly florid ruling, U.S. District Court Judge William Pauley wrote, "The September 11th terrorist attacks revealed, in the starkest terms, just how dangerous and interconnected the world is. While Americans depended on technology for the convenience of modernity, Al-Qaeda plotted in a 7th century milieu to use that technology against us. It was a bold jujitsu, and it succeeded because conventional intelligence gathering could not detect diffuse filaments connecting Al-Qaeda. No matter if it bears any resemblance to reality, The meme has been planted, and the courts are going along with it. It is now official lore that the NSA needs to spy on everyone's phone metadata to prevent the next 9/11 from taking place. Of course, that's not the only lie in this story. The even bigger lie that is being propounded now is that the national conversation and the court cases are still revolving around the false notion that NSA phone spying is somehow limited to metadata, as if all the NSA is collecting are lists of phone numbers and call durations. We have suspected for years that phone calls were being recorded and stored wholesale, but that was actually confirmed by Tim Clemente, a former FBI counterterrorism agent who casually let it slip on Aaron Burnett's CNN program in May that U.S. intelligence agencies have access to complete phone conversations whenever they want in the name of national security.
Now, obviously it was a voicemail. They could try to get the phone companies to give that up at this point. But if it's not a voicemail, it's just a conversation. There's no way they actually can find out what happened, right? Unless she tells them.
No, there is a way. We certainly have ways in national security investigations to find out exactly what was said in that conversation. It's not necessarily something that the FBI is going to want to present in court, but it may help lead the investigation and or lead the questioning of her.
So somewhere
we can certainly
it's being
find that out.
digitized, or they can actually get that. Because people were saying, look, that wouldn't be possible. It's pretty incredible what you're saying.
No, welcome to America. All of that stuff is being captured as we speak, whether we know it or like it or not.
Although this caused a buzz at the time and was picked up by numerous publications, it was soon covered over by the Snowden story, which once again focused people's attention on metadata. One person who did not gloss over it, however, was Russ Tice. He is a former NSA employee who became a whistleblower almost a decade ago as one of the sources for the initial New York Times story exposing the illegal NSA wiretapping program. When he heard Clemente's interview, he immediately contacted his ex-NSA friends and discussed whether the NSA was already recording every phone conversation they could intercept and storing them at their new Utah data center. The ex-NSA gatherings consensus? This was exactly what the NSA was doing. As a result, Tice decided to go further than ever before about what he knew regarding illegal NSA activities. In a series of interviews on BoilingFrogsPost.com, The Corbett Report, and other media venues, Tice revealed that during his time as an NSA employee, he had personally handled the eavesdropping orders to monitor the communications of high-ranking judges, congressmen, and military officials, presumably for the purposes of blackmail.
Initially what I saw was they were targeting news organizations, they were targeting U.S. companies that did international business, they were looking at financial institutions, but they were also going after the State Department and Secretary of State Colin Powell at the time, and they were going after high-ranking military generals, and that was just with my space capabilities that I saw. Now later, when I got together with colleagues, and we started to put together the terrestrial side, that's the side that is being done with all those nodes all over the country with the fiber optics and that sort of thing, then we found out that it got much worse. Because, and this was just the phone that we were looking at, but it was also being done at the email level, but that wasn't the information I was getting. The information I was seeing were phone numbers that were being plugged into a system that was going after people's phone numbers and associated numbers, and a lot of numbers I wasn't even sure, but they went after law firms and lawyers. They went after more generals. General Petraeus was one of the guys. It seemed like right about that 3-star level was they were going after admirals and generals. They went after the Supreme Court, of which I held Judge Alito's paperwork in my hand, numbers associated with Judge Alito that someone had put into the system that NSA used to spy on Judge Alito.
And let's just break this down a little bit, because these are explosive allegations right now that I have not heard anyone talk about before, that there are actually orders that you personally saw in your hands to wiretap Judge Alito, high-ranking intelligence officers, David Petraeus, Barack Obama.
Wannabe Senator Barack Obama. At that time, he wasn't even a senator. He had won his primary in Illinois, and I think maybe the catalyst, and I'm not sure, was the fact that he had just done a big speech at the Democratic convention. Now, I was at that time a lifelong Republican. I didn't even watch the Democratic convention. So at the time, the significance of it really didn't hit me until later. I mean, I did look up, well, who's this guy, Barack Obama? Well, okay, he made a speech, blah, blah, blah. But then, of course, later, things, started to, come into play that this is our future president of the United States.
And once again, these shocking revelations are being spun away into theory and hearsay. This time it's Senator Bernie Sanders lobbing the softball at the NSA as he sends them a letter politely asking whether the NSA is spying on Congress. Senator Sanders did not ask about the wiretapping of communications that Tice has already exposed, however, but merely whether or not the NSA metadata spying extends to members of Congress. Once again, the real scandal is papered over by milquetoast non-confrontation by the bought and paid for Congress that have been perfectly content to let this happen for years now. The entire NSA fiasco is stage-managed theatrics from start to finish, a carefully choreographed stage show with full cooperation from the corporate media that is only too willing to play along and misdirect the national conversation to areas of little or no importance. Meanwhile, in reality, the only question worth discussing is how to abolish the NSA entirely. Since this is not a question that is on the table politically, it is up to the public to find alternative ways of shutting down the NSA. Luckily, there is at least one innovative project happening that proposes to do just that.
Fact. The new NSA data center in Utah requires 1.7 million gallons of water every single day to operate. Billions of Fourth Amendment violations need massive computers and the water to cool them. That water is being supplied by the state of Utah. Fact. There's absolutely nothing in the Constitution which requires your state to help the feds violate your rights. Our message to Utah: turn it off.
Well, in the broadest sense, the Off Now campaign is a state and local initiative to push back against NSA spying. We do not have any faith in Congress or the president or the federal courts to actually do anything to rein in the NSA spy machine. They may pretend like they do. They may pass some bills, but they're not really going to do anything that's going to be of any use. So we've decided we need to take a different approach. We want to harness the power of our state and local governments to create obstructions and make it as difficult as we can for the NSA to continue this unconstitutional and immoral spying on virtually everybody in the world. And so one of the main aspects of the campaign, probably the central aspect right now, is the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, and it's a piece of legislation that we are introducing at the state level. And essentially it does four things. I'll run through them really quick in a bullet-pointed way to make things easy to understand. The first thing it does is it denies material support from the state to the NSA. So essentially anything that the NSA gets from the state, they won't get it anymore. And this could be very significant in some places. For instance, Utah, they use 1.7 million gallons of water a day to cool their spy computers in the Bluffdale data center. That water is actually supplied by a utility that's owned by the city of Bluffdale, which is a subdivision of the state of Utah. With this bill, it will make it possible to take steps to turn that water off and force the NSA to find water someplace else. So this can be extremely significant in states that actually have NSA facilities. We'd also deal with public utilities that supply electricity and things that we probably haven't even imagined yet. The second thing it does, and I really think this is the most significant part of the bill, at least in the short term, is that it prohibits any data that has been gathered by the NSA without a warrant that is shared with state and local law enforcement. It makes it inadmissible in state courts. We know that the NSA is sharing this data. We know that very little of it actually has anything to do with quote-unquote national security. It's for basic law enforcement purposes. So this would basically say, you can share this data all you want to, but it's going to be useless to state and local law enforcement in court, and it will kind of take that dagger out of the heart of the Fourth Amendment that this kind of information sharing shoves in there. A third aspect that it does is we have 166 universities in the United States that have partnerships with the NSA. They call them Centers for Academic Excellence, which I think is a nice Orwellian term suitable for this particular subject. This bill would deal with state and public universities and force them to leave these relationships and keep any other state universities from entering into them. And then finally, it deals with corporations that do business with the NSA. And essentially, it's a disincentive to these corporations. Basically, the bill says, Corporation XYZ, if you're going to do business with the NSA, then we're going to prohibit you from having any state or local contracts and take that business away from you. So hopefully, it will create some disincentive. So this is the basic gist of the legislation that we're working to get passed.
Those who are interested in finding out how they can help to turn the taps off on the NSA, literally, are encouraged to explore the Nullify NSA hashtag on Twitter and the campaign website at offnow.org.
There's no more federal than Federal Express.
You try a hide and destroy a freedom. You seek agenda. We know you anti-American. You come pervert American Constitution. 1913, corrupt in the system. Devalue dollar, hyperinflation. The Federal Reserve, controlled by Lucifer. He can see you lying.